Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am pleased to welcome you to the third week in our series. It's a very special series that we're doing titled Celebrating Canadian-American Friendship. On today's program, we want to talk about the subtopic of resolving complaints of discrimination, promoting human rights through educational programs, and fostering equality by having two guests, one from Canada and one from the United States. First of all, welcome to the program Leslie Goddard. She is the Executive Director of the Idaho Human Rights Commission located in Boise, Idaho. For many years, she served as legal counsel to the commission, and now for 6 years, she has been the Executive Director appointed in the mid-1990s by Governor Phil Batt. Leslie, welcome to the program. It's always a pleasure to see you. We've known one another a long time, and we're so happy to have you on the program to talk about how we deal with those issues in the United States and the state of Idaho.
Thank you very much.
And I'm equally pleased to have from Canada, welcome our new friend from Canada, Cassie Palomar. She is with the Education and Commission Services Manager for the Alberta Human Rights and Citizenship Commission in Calgary, Alberta. Since joining the Alberta Human Rights and Citizenship Commission in 1994, she has held a number of senior positions with that organization, including Assistant Director and Regional Manager, and she is a member of the Commission's management team. It's been a pleasure to meet you and welcome to the program. We also want to discuss how this particularly important issue is dealt with in your country.
Thanks so much, Tony.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our two regular panelists. First of all is Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and Janelle will commence today's questioning.
Leslie, let's start with you and talk about what your commission does. What does the Commission on Human Rights do, and what is your authority for doing that work?
The Idaho Commission has been in existence since 1969, and we really have two main goals. Well, actually, I guess I would say three. Most of our time goes into complaint resolution. If somebody feels they've been the victim of discrimination, they can file an administrative complaint with us, and we try to resolve that. And if we can't resolve it, then we investigate it and we say, yes, we think that discrimination has occurred or not. So we try to give people advice on that. So that's probably the biggest chunk of what we do. In addition to that, we do try to do educational work on the issues of human rights, and that includes working with schools, working with nonprofit groups, going around the state as much as our budget will allow us to do that kind of work. And then the third thing that we do is information and referral. A lot of people come to us with workplace issues in particular that really don't fit within our jurisdiction. And so we do try to make good referrals to people to those places where they can get help with what those problems are.
And are you a statutorily created agency?
We are. We are a state agency. We're probably the smallest unit of state government that you would find. There's 11 full-time positions. We also have 9 commissioners that are appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. And then also, because the federal agency, the EEOC, doesn't have an office in the state of Idaho, they contract with us to handle the federal discrimination claims as well that arise in the state of Idaho.
Quite a few of our viewers live outside our state, so do other states have something similar to ours?
All the states in this part of the country do, yes. Their processes are maybe a little bit different, but they would have something that would be called a name similar to a state human rights commission.
And Cassie, can you tell us about the Human Rights Commission in your state, so to speak, your province?
Well, it's very similar in many ways in terms of the functions and responsibilities of the Human Rights and Citizenship Commission in Alberta. We work to foster equality and reduce discrimination. We do that through two key areas of work. One is our preventative work in the education area, building information resources. We have a confidential inquiry service for callers that call in, and those can be both potential complainants as well as employers and other individuals who are just looking for more information about the legislation and how it applies. The second important pillar of our work is really our work in helping people resolve issues and complaints involving discrimination. And the authority that we operate under is a provincial legislation. It's called the Human Rights, Citizenship and Multiculturalism Act. Our commission is established in a similar way as commissions across Canada are established, and there's provincial human rights legislation, territorial human rights legislation, and there's also federal human rights legislation. And the important thing about those legislations is that one is not senior to another. We simply have different jurisdictions and activities that we're involved in.
Thank you.
Erna Reinhardt.
That's a perfect lead-in to my question. I wanted to ask both of you how, because it seems like it would be very complex and confusing, but you guys probably have a very easy answer to this, or a simple answer to this, but in the United States we have federal laws and we also have state laws, and so I want both of you to kind of respond to how do those play together, how do they work together, when does one override the other, how does that work? And let's start with Leslie.
Okay, you're absolutely right. Within the state of Idaho, the federal employment discrimination laws are applicable, as is the state discrimination law. As I mentioned, the EEOC does not have an office in Idaho, so they contract with us to handle the federal claims for them. So if a person comes to us and wishes to file a discrimination complaint, and it is a case that would be jurisdictional under both the state law and the federal law, they just have to file one complaint with us. We cite all the statutes that would be applicable. They've done the state filing, and then we are responsible for also getting it filed under the federal system. The importance of that, then, is we have an agreement with the EEOC that only one agency at a time will be involved in investigating the case. So if we have taken it, as I just sort of laid out my scenario, then we handle it and we investigate both the state claim and the federal claim. At the close of that, when we have made our determination on it, the party that is not satisfied with that result does have the right to ask the EEOC to take a look at our work and to agree or to disagree with it under federal law. It's not an appeal process in the sense that they can't overturn what we have done, but they might say, well, we think under federal law we may have come to a different conclusion, but the state law determination stands, as does the federal law. And in point of fact, that very, very seldom happens. They almost always agree with what has come out of our agency.
And is it common that the state statutes go further than the federal?
In Idaho, the state statute is broader because it covers employers that are too small to be covered under the federal law. And also the time period for coming to accessing the statute under the Idaho law is longer. It's 1 year to get to us, and it's 300 days under the federal law. In terms of whether or not that's common, I don't know. I think that other states have shorter periods of time for filing, actually, but Idaho's just happens to be set up where ours is a little bit longer.
Alrighty. And Cassie, same question?
Well, in Alberta, an individual, what would happen is an individual who had a complaint or a complaint alleging discrimination, they would contact one of the commissions. They would either contact the provincial commission, the Alberta Human Rights and Citizenship Commission, or they might contact the federal commission, which is the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And as I said earlier, there really are two different jurisdictions, and they govern two different activities. And what we would do is speak with the caller and find out whether they either worked or whether it was about a situation that was provincially regulated or federally regulated, and that would determine which of the commissions we would either refer them to the Canadian Commission or we would deal with it ourselves.
All right.
Political science is coming out in me now, dealing with public policy. And Cassie, I will start with you. Mm-hmm. First of all, we both have a federal system, with the national mm-hmm. government, and you have provinces mm-hmm. and we have states, and we reverse how we deal with federalism. But that's not my question. I just want that footnote. Mm-hmm. Under the laws that you have in your province in mm-hmm. relation to your commission, would you mm-hmm. share with our viewers the protected classes? It's very extensive, and I think that people are familiar with our protected classes at the national level or state level mm-hmm.
In
our country will be somewhat different than yours. If we could start with that.
Okay. Well, in Alberta, there are a number of types of discrimination that are protected, And those have evolved and changed over the years. Most recently, the legislation was reviewed and revised in 1996. And at that point, there were a couple of different grounds that were added. Really, some of the most grounds that we see most frequently cited in the complaints that are made are physical disability, gender, mental disability, religion, race, color, ancestry, place of origin, marital status, family status, source of income, legal source of income, sexual orientation. So those are gender, of course. So those are among the grounds that we deal with.
A lot of very broad-based gender, protected classes. Now, Leslie, in Idaho and in the United States, the number of protected classes are less than those, aren't they?
It is, Tony. It is smaller. In Idaho, people are protected against discrimination on the basis of race and sex and color and religion and national origin, age if they're 40 or older, and disabilities, either mental or physical disabilities. So those are the areas that we look at.
A significant number, but not as broad as the ones that are in
Right.
Canada, or at least in that province. Then the second question I have is that something we've talked about in Idaho for many, many years, and I'll switch and go to Leslie first this time. If you would like to maybe have some change in the law or just to discuss in general issues that are really important and you need more data and information, you don't have the power in the state of Idaho to subpoena. Is that correct? Would you explain the problem with that?
Okay. You are right, Tony. We do not have administrative subpoena power. So if we are investigating a case and there's a piece of information that we feel that we really need, we do not and can't get it. We don't have the ability to subpoena to get that information. In the real world of things, most of the cases that are filed with us are also filed with the EEOC, that joint filing system, and they do have subpoena authority. So what we can say to the employer, that's usually who it is, you can give it to us voluntarily, or we will give the case to the EEOC, and they can issue a subpoena for it. And generally, we really don't have to get that far. I'm actually rather amazed that people are as cooperative with us as they are. But I think that has developed over the years, that people see it as a system that is basically fair. And so it does not interfere that much with our ability to get the information that we need to make a determination as to whether or not we think discrimination has occurred.
So you do have that protective process of having the federal law.
That's right.
But are the cases in which the federal would not be involved, and then of course if you didn't get the cooperation you could not get the information?
That is correct. And probably what we would have to do is that case would end up in district court.
Okay. Or there is subpoena power, of course.
Right, that's correct.
Kathy, how about in your jurisdiction?
Well, there is authority under our legislation to require people to participate in the process. And so an investigator, for example, would have the power to enter premises, to secure documents, those kinds of things if there are. So there is that part of the process. And similar, I think, to what's happening in Idaho, we don't typically need to use, in fact, I can't think of an example where we actually have used that power. People tend to cooperate with the process because they understand that the process is designed to help facilitate resolution of these difficult situations. We have two parts to our commission. One part of our commission is really working to resolve, in terms of the complaints, is working to resolve and settle human rights complaints. And about 96% of our complaints typically settle through mediation, a combination of mediation and investigation and settlement. Some complaints are also withdrawn or abandoned as a natural part of the process. Then we have a second stage for complaints that are not decided at that point, or complaints where a complainant might want to appeal a decision to dismiss or discontinue a complaint. And so we have established within 1996 they came into place human rights tribunals or human rights panels, and that's a system of administrative tribunals, and that's where we would have witnesses coming forward if necessary. But again, they don't always need to be brought forward in that way.
Not always get to that stage.
No.
Janelle Burke.
My next question will have to do with remedies and penalties and what you have under your laws. Let's start with you, Cassie, and can you tell us what are some of the remedies if there is a violation?
I'd be glad to talk about that. You know, human rights legislation is really designed to be remedial in nature, not punitive, and it's designed to restore the individual who's suffered a loss to a position of being whole again. And so we're really guided by the very fact-specific situation of a complaint and what the loss was that they suffered. So the remedies are not spelled out in our legislation typically, but can vary from monetary to non-monetary kinds of remedies. A non-monetary remedy might be an apology to a complainant. It might be a letter of reference if it was an employment matter. It might be restoring a complainant to the situation that they had before the discrimination occurred. Monetary settlements might involve compensation for loss of income, benefits, or injury to damage injury, those kinds of things. So that's the range that we're looking at.
A very broad range as well. Mm-hmm. And what about the remedies under United States law?
The concept behind our remedies is very similar to what Cassie has just been explaining. We actually try to mediate cases as soon as they're filed with us. And during that mediation stage, we don't know whether discrimination has occurred or not. So at that point, we are just trying to bring those two parties to some point at which they can agree on, I will do this and I will do that, and we can both walk away from this complaint. Probably not totally happy, but they can both walk away from the complaint. If we have investigated a complaint and we have found that we believe that discrimination did occur, at that point, we put on an advocate's hat because the public interest now is in resolving not only putting the person who is the victim of that act of discrimination back in whatever position they should have been, but also to remedy whatever the problem was that happened within that employment or happened within that apartment complex that caused that act of discrimination to occur. So at that point, we're looking beyond just the particular victim that has come to us, but we're trying to remedy the situation for those people that are going to be coming down the line and maybe dealing with that same employment situation. So that's what we try to do at what we call the conciliation stage, and that's after we've done an investigation and found that we think discrimination occurred. If none of that works and we can't resolve it voluntarily, our option is to file an action in district court with the commission as the plaintiff in the lawsuit, and we to try it there.
Thank you.
Earn Reinhardt.
I want to talk a little bit with both of you about the educational component of what you do, because I think that's so important to all of us and to all of our viewers. And I'll start with Cassie. Tell us a little bit about how you can help raise awareness with individuals in terms of understanding what discrimination is and what your agency does and things like that.
Absolutely. You're so right. Education and the preventative work that we do is critical, and it's really the area where we believe we can achieve some long-term change. And it involves individuals, and it involves organizations and institutions, and really society as a whole. When we think about our education program, we think about awareness as a foundational building block, and then we think about, beyond that, we think about building understanding about the legislation and how it applies. Then we think about building some more specific knowledge and skills. And then finally we think about more of the transformational work leading to change, usually in collaborative work with other organizations. In terms of that first level of awareness building, we have information resources, both print and website. We have our confidential inquiry system, and we have human rights officers who staff that system and receive calls both from potential complainants or others who are looking for information, like employers or landlords who want to know about the legislation and how it applies. So we do those kinds of things. We work in partnership with organizations. For example, we've established a Diversity Leadership Award with the Alberta Chambers of Commerce, and we've done that in order to build awareness among employers about the importance of diversity. And we want to honor and recognize those employers who are doing excellent work and benchmarking really best practices in creating inclusive and respectful workplaces. We also have a partnership with a television network in Alberta, Global Television, and what we've done is launched a media initiative with them, and we have some advertisements that feature the unscripted voices of Albertans talking about the values that they believe in around human rights and diversity. And those series of ads that really encourage Albertans to take individual responsibility for their actions are being shown now on global television and throughout Alberta, and have had a very positive response. So those are some of the things that we do. Educational presentations and displays certainly are another thing that we do.
Great. Leslie, how about you?
Well, you know, we had the opportunity to see those ads earlier
Great.
today, and I'm so envious of those. I think they were wonderful,
Powerful.
and I wish we had done something like that in Idaho. In fact, we were talking about how much it cost and all of those things a few minutes ago. Other than that, which we have not been able to do, we do try to do as much educational work as we possibly can, and that's that technical assistance component that we feel that we have too. We have a strategic plan under which we operate, and raising awareness about discrimination issues is part of that strategic plan, which we do. We take every opportunity that we get to go to schools, if we're invited into schools. Most of the educational presentations that we give come from employers who want education on particular topics, such as harassment. I think the one that I have been speaking on the most around Idaho this year has been on just maintaining a respectful workplace. And that seems to be something that employers are really wanting training on. So we do that. And then the other thing that we do is, as Cassie mentioned, we partner with all the many wonderful human relations groups that have sprung up around the state of Idaho as much as possible to deal with particular issues like education, or maybe Hispanic organizations, or with the NAACP, or the JACL, and as much as possible we try to partner with them to deal with whatever their particular issues, so we can sort of spread ourselves out a little bit.
Great.
One thing that I think that would be very great to our viewers in Canada and the United States, and we're very proud of the fact, Cassie, we have a lot of viewers in Canada, and we hear from them on this program. We're so fortunate. No wonder we should do these programs and connecting together. I have heard both of you say today from two different countries that you really try to not only make people whole again, which is essential, but you try to resolve these things in a very positive way, trying to avoid litigation. Not only is that very expensive, but it can leave much more bitter results. So this time I will start again with Cassie and say, isn't it true that a very small percentage of your cases wind up in that kind of very, very difficult, maybe bitter struggle?
Very few of them end up in a situation where they're dealt with by human rights panels or administrative tribunals. But that is a very important part of our system. Our emphasis really is in supporting both of the parties, either through mediation, and we have a similar process, I think, to one that you have in Idaho, where we try to bring the parties together and work with them. The Commission plays a very neutral role in that, first to try to determine whether there is room for agreement in a way to in how we can resolve this complaint and move on. And actually, last year, a full 59% of the complaints made to the Commission settled through this mediation process that we call conciliation. And then from that, a smaller number go on, and they're investigated. And again, if we do find that there is sufficient evidence to suggest that there's a basis to proceed, our role is to work with the parties, the complainant, and then the respondent. The respondent is the party against whom the complaint is made, to see whether there's a way of coming to a settlement that makes sense and, as you say, restores the complainant to the position they would be if they were whole. And then a very small percentage, about 4% of our complaint load, will carry on to this stage where where they're heard by a human rights panel. And not all are heard by the panel. Many settle on the courtroom steps, as it were.
Right. Leslie, is it similar statistics in Idaho?
I think so. I think a very small number of the cases actually end up in district court, but I would certainly agree with Cassie that it is very important for people to know that that possibility is there. And cases in Idaho can go into court either through private counsel, or they can go through the Human Rights Commission. If
you reach the decision, it's legitimate, or you believe it to be very accurate complaint.
For the Commission to file an action in district court, we would have to have made that determination, and also attempted to conciliate it and been unable to do so. So we would have to have gone through those steps. For private litigation, once we have investigated a case and dismissed it out of the administrative system, whether we found probable cause or not, they still get a notice of right to sue and have 90 days to go into district court if they're going to pursue that. So they can even take a case that we have looked at and said, we don't think that discrimination occurred here. They still have that option to take that case into district court. I think in point of fact, very few do, but that opportunity is there.
I got another part of my question is that it's the egg chicken question. How many, since you've been very successful in negotiating through this process, what percentage of that, well, that's not a good way of putting it, is the fact that we do have laws and we do have the possibility of litigation, that helps you in that process, but also are we growing and improving? This is a rather positive way to look at it, is that people are becoming more and more not only aware of the rights of people, but also more supportive of diversity. Cassie?
Well, in Alberta, we believe that that is very much the case. Every year we do a telephone survey of Albertans, and we want to find out what they think about human rights and what they think about how important it is for them to have an environment free of discrimination. And typically we find that something in the order of 96% of Albertans tell us that having an environment free of discrimination is absolutely important to their overall quality of life in their community. And when we ask them whether they think human rights are well protected in the province, somewhere in the order of about 85% typically tell us that yes, they think human rights are well protected in the province. So they are important pieces of legislation. And the preamble to the legislation, you hate to talk about legislation because it's sometimes a very dry subject, but the preamble to our legislation is very moving, and it talks about the principles of respect for the rights and the dignities of all people. And I think that's the value system that we're really working towards. And in Alberta, one of the core businesses of the government is protecting human rights and promoting fairness and access.
Leslie, do you see the same thing, the growth and improvement in how people look at diversity?
I do, Tony, and I've got 26 years of experience with the Human Rights Commission, right. And I think I can see a real difference in the way that people deal with that Human Rights Commission process today as compared with the way they did in 1978 when I first started there. There was a lot more suspicion, a lot more, oh, you're just out to get us, and all of those kinds of things. I think people work much more cooperatively and understand that it really is good for Idaho and for the business client and for the people in Idaho to have a good administration of anti-discrimination laws. So I see it there. And then I also see the growth of community-based human relations groups, such as what you have worked with, Tony, so much. And those sorts of things just springing up all over the state. And we didn't used to have those. And I think that has made such a difference in terms of putting human rights issues on the table and people recognizing in their own communities how important it is to respect human rights.
I cannot think of a more positive note on which to end our program. That this is very encouraging, both in Canada and the United States. And on behalf of our panel, I want to say to Cassie and Leslie both, you have honored us with your presence on this program and at North Idaho College and this symposium that we've been doing. We have learned so much, and we want to continue to celebrate what great friends we are in Canada and the United States. And again, thank you for being on our program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we so enjoyed bringing you this program on celebrating Canadian-American friendship, and we're going to continue this for several more weeks with guests on a lot of different subjects that we've been so fortunate to have a number of our friends from Canada to be with us, and will be in the future. Please join us again next week at the same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart. That was the one.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.